My daughter-in-law told me my place was with the children. Not those exact words, not shouted, but the implication hung in the air of her pristine dining room in Evanston, Illinois, heavier than the scent of roasted garlic and sage. She didn't point, didn't raise her voice, but her eyes flicked towards the small, round table shoved near the kitchen doorway, the one covered with a plastic cloth and mismatched paper plates, where my three youngest grandchildren were already squirming. The adults, all eight of them, were clustered around the long, polished mahogany table, linen napkins folded precisely beside heavy ceramic plates. It was Thanksgiving. The table was set for 10. She'd made room for everyone else, just not for me. If you've lived through something like this, let me know where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious who else this resonates with. The words weren't necessary. The absence of a place setting at the main table spoke volumes. The fact that the only empty chair was the one tucked between a hyper 7-year-old and a toddler who was already smearing cranberry sauce on the plastic was the confirmation. I stood in the archway between the living room and the dining room, a bottle of expensive wine I'd brought still clutched in my hand. My son, David, stood beside his wife, Helena, a neutral, slightly anxious expression on his face. He looked away quickly when my eyes met his. It wasn't the first time he'd done that. My throat felt tight. The air suddenly felt thin. The festive chatter around the main table faded into a dull roar. I saw Helena smile, a thin, polite smile, and gesture vaguely towards the smaller table. "We thought it would be easier," she said. Her voice pitched just loud enough to carry over the general noise, but not loud enough to draw specific attention. Easier for whom? Easier than acknowledging my existence? Easier than admitting she hadn't planned for me? My hand tightened on the wine bottle neck. It wasn't just about a chair. It was about being seen, being valued. It was about 2 decades of my life, poured into raising the man standing silently beside her, reduced to a place at a child's table. The plastic tablecloth seemed to mock me. The distance between the two tables felt like a chasm I couldn't cross. I took a breath, a deep, shaky one that didn't help. My fingers were cold. I could feel the ridges of the glass. The bottle felt heavy, solid. Unlike me, in that moment, I felt like a ghost invited to a party, only to be told the only available space was in the coat closet. It was cold there, and dark. This wasn't cold or dark, but it was isolated. It was dismissive. The children were already getting restless, their high-pitched voices carrying snippets of complaints about broccoli. I saw their small hands reaching for bread rolls. Their world felt miles away from the hushed, adult conversation flowing over linen napkins and gleaming silverware. Helena's smile hadn't faltered. It was a perfect hostess smile, except it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cool, appraising, checking if I would comply. My son was still looking at the floor. The others at the main table seemed not to notice. Or perhaps they noticed and chose to ignore. The wine bottle felt heavier. I wanted to throw it. I wanted to walk out. But old habits die hard. The instinct to smooth things over, to not make a scene, was deeply ingrained. I had spent years doing just that, smoothing over David's teenage rebellion, smoothing over early marital spats, smoothing over Helena's passive-aggressive comments at holidays. I had smoothed myself away, it seemed, reduced myself to a non-entity to keep the peace. The peace they then used to push me further to the margins. The children at the small table looked up, their faces smudged with something. One of them waved tentatively. My youngest grandchild, Leo. He was 4. He didn't understand tables. He just saw a place to sit. He saw me standing there, lost. It wasn't his fault. None of this was the children's fault. They were just children, but being relegated to their level felt like a deliberate act of diminishing. Like saying my thoughts, my conversation, my very presence wasn't worthy of adult company, that I belonged with those who needed supervision, not participation. The humiliation was a physical ache. It started in my chest and spread outwards, making my skin feel hot and prickly. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to lash out. The silence from David was the worst part. His inability to step in, to say, "Mother, of course you sit here," was a betrayal as deep as his wife's calculated exclusion. He was my son. He knew. He knew what this felt like. He knew the years I'd spent preparing holiday meals, setting the table just so, making sure everyone felt welcome. His silence was assent. It was agreement. It said, "Yes, this is where you belong now." Out of the way. The realization solidified. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was intentional. My feet felt rooted to the spot. The small table seemed to shrink further away, mocking me with its plastic cheerfulness. The main table, with its aura of adult importance and belonging, seemed impossibly distant. I could hear snippets of laughter, conversations about work and travel plans, things I was never asked about anymore. My world had shrunk. My concerns were dismissed as irrelevant. I was the grandmother who could babysit, who could knit sweaters, who could provide history and context no one wanted to hear. My professional life, my opinions, my experiences outside of being mom and grandma were invisible to them. This table arrangement was just a physical manifestation of that invisibility. I looked at the children again. Leo gave another small wave, his eyes wide. He didn't understand the lines being drawn. He didn't understand the quiet violence of the gesture. He just saw me hesitating. I managed a weak smile back. The corners of Helena's mouth twitched upwards. Victory. She had drawn a line, and she expected me to step over it, into the designated space of the marginalized. I thought of all the other lines she had drawn over the years, the holidays where she insisted on hosting, but then subtly controlled every aspect, making me feel like a guest in what had once felt like a shared family tradition. The decisions about the grandchildren where my opinion wasn't sought, or worse, openly disregarded. The way she spoke over me in conversation, or turned her back to address someone else when I was speaking. The way David never intervened, always siding with her, always deferring. His comfort was paramount. My feelings were secondary, if they registered at all. This wasn't sudden. Not really. It was the culmination of years of slow, steady erosion, a chipping away at my role, my status, my very identity within the family I had built. The kids' table was the final blow. It was the official announcement that I was no longer a central figure, no longer an equal. I was a periphery player, to be managed, kept separate, like an inconvenient truth. The roast turkey sat on the main table, a golden brown centerpiece, radiating warmth and the rich smell of a traditional holiday. It was the focal point. It was what everyone gathered around. The carving knife lay beside it, ready for the ritual of division and distribution. It felt like everything was being divided, and I was getting the scraps, far from the source. The wine bottle was cold now. My hand was starting to ache from gripping it so tightly. I could feel the dampness on the glass. My mind raced, not with panic, but with a strange clarity. It was like a fog was lifting. The years of pretending, of making excuses for their behavior, of minimizing my own pain, seemed absurd in the stark light of this moment. There was no pretending this away. This was a deliberate insult, delivered on a day meant for family and gratitude, and I was supposed to just accept it. Smile, sit down with the kids, and be grateful for the scraps of attention tossed my way from the adult world. The noise of the party swelled around me again, reasserting its presence, its indifference to my silent crisis. The main table was a world away, a world I was no longer invited to inhabit fully. I looked at my son one last time. He was talking to his brother-in-law now, gesturing with his hands, a forced laugh on his face. He still hadn't looked back at me. He knew. He knew what was happening, and he was choosing not to see it. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Every detail seemed magnified, imbued with meaning. The way the candlelight caught the edge of a wineglass on the main table, reflecting a tiny, distant star. The way the plastic tablecloth on the kids' table was peeling up at one corner. The shrill sound of a child's giggle, innocent in itself, but grating against my raw nerves. I was trapped in this tableau, this carefully constructed scene of family harmony that was anything but. The shame was overwhelming. Not shame for myself, but shame for them. Shame that they could do this. Shame that my son could allow it. The thought was cold, sharp. It cut through the swirling confusion and hurt. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect. It was about recognition. And they had clearly stated, in the most public way possible within this private gathering, that I was not worthy of either. The adults were starting to settle into their seats. Helena was gliding around, placing dishes on the main table. The turkey stood proud, the undisputed king of the feast. It was golden, burnished, perfect, a symbol of abundance, of coming together, a symbol from which I was being deliberately excluded. My mind began to race, not towards tears or pleading, but towards a quiet, building fury. It wasn't loud or hot. It was cold, precise. What did I owe them? What was I gaining by staying here and accepting this indignity? The answer, stark and clear, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. I had given them everything, years of my life, unconditional love, support, financial help when they needed it. And this was the return. A seat at the kids' table, a clear message that I was an afterthought, a burden, someone to be managed and minimized. The desire to disappear was still there, but it was being overtaken by something else, something harder. An sense of self-preservation, long dormant, was stirring. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to watch them eat their perfect meal at their perfect table while I sat on the periphery, an exile in my own family. The plastic tablecloth felt like a physical barrier, cheap and flimsy, but effective in separating me. I looked at the wine bottle again. It was a good vintage, one I had been saving. I set it carefully on a nearby side table, away from the children's reach. A small act of defiance, perhaps, refusing to bring my offering to the table of my humiliation. The noise around the main table seemed to increase. They were passing dishes, starting to serve themselves. The gravitational pull of the meal was taking hold, drawing everyone into its orbit, everyone but me, left drifting on the edge. I watched as David reached for the carving knife. He looked comfortable, at ease, playing the role of the host. The role I used to play, year after year, the role I taught him how to play. He didn't hesitate. He didn't glance towards the small table. Towards me. He was already carving, his attention focused on the task, on the main event. The silence from him was deafening. Louder than the laughter, louder than the clinking of silverware. His silence was the sound of my heart breaking, quietly, definitively. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was how it was. This was how it would be. Unless I changed it. The thought was empowering, terrifying. Change it? How? What could I possibly do to alter this established dynamic, built on years of their comfort and my compliance? The answer was simpler and far more radical than I had ever allowed myself to consider. I could leave, not just leave the table, leave the house, leave them to their perfect, exclusive feast. The idea took root, a small, hard seed in the barren ground of my humiliation. Leave. Just turn round and walk out. The sheer simplicity of it was appealing. No scene, no arguments, just absence. But that didn't feel quite right either. Leaving quietly would still feel like defeat, like slinking away. I needed something more. Something that acknowledged the injustice. Something that wasn't just passive withdrawal, but active reclaiming. My gaze fell back on the turkey. It was magnificent. Golden, steaming slightly, promising succulent meat. It was the centerpiece, the symbol. It was the Thanksgiving turkey. An idea, audacious and terrifying, began to form. Not just leave. Leave with the turkey. It was ridiculous. It was petty. It was perfect. Taking the turkey wouldn't just be taking food, it would be taking the center. It would be disrupting their perfect picture. It would be a physical manifestation of the peace of the family, the peace of the tradition that they were denying me. It would be saying, you can have your exclusive table, but you don't get to have the symbol of togetherness while you push me out. The thought sent a jolt through me, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It was scandalous. It was exactly what I needed to do. The children at the small table were distracted now, digging into the breadbasket. The adults at the main table were passing plates, filling them high. Helena was smiling, radiant, presiding over her domain. My son was carving, his back to me. This was my chance. While they were focused on the act of serving, on the abundance they were sharing amongst themselves, I could execute my plan. It felt like a military operation, sudden and decisive. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just action. I straightened my shoulders. The ache in my chest was still there, but it was overlaid now with a tense, coiled energy. My hands were no longer cold. They felt warm, almost buzzing. I took another breath. This one steady. I needed to move with purpose, but without drawing undue attention until the last possible second. My eyes scanned the room. The kitchen doorway was my exit. The turkey was on the table. Within reach, my car keys were in my coat pocket, which was hanging in the hall closet near the front door. The plan formed instantly, a clear sequence of actions. Get the turkey, walk to the closet, get my coat and keys, walk out the front door. Do not engage, do not explain, just leave. The fear was still present. a cold knot in my stomach, but the resolve was stronger. This wasn't just about retribution, it was about survival. It was about drawing my own line in the sand. It was about declaring that I would no longer accept being treated as surplus. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the background noise of the feast. My palms were damp, but my vision was clear. The Turk, the door, my freedom. I moved, not quickly, but with deliberate steps. I walked towards the main table, past the oblivious adults. I felt their peripheral presence, the warmth radiating from their gathered bodies, the scent of their expensive perfumes and colognes. I didn't look at anyone. I kept my eyes fixed on the turkey. It seemed to grow larger, more imposing, as I approached. Helena was at the head of the table, serving stuffing. David was still carving, engrossed in separating white meat from dark. No one noticed me at first. I reached the edge of the table. I could feel the heat from the bird on my face. It was a magnificent creature. All that work, all that tradition, embodied in this one roasted bird. I reached out my hands. The platter was heavy, ceramic, substantial. I gripped the edges firmly. It was warm, almost hot, through the ceramic. The weight surprised me slightly, but I was strong. I had carried heavier things in my life. I lifted it slowly, carefully. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation continued. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. It felt like an eternity that I was standing there holding their centerpiece, utterly exposed. Then, a voice cut through the air. "Mother, what are you doing?" It was David. He had finally looked up. His carving knife was poised in midair. His face was a mask of confusion, then alarm. Helena turned, her eyes widening, her smile instantly vanishing. The adults nearest to us fell silent. The silence spread outwards from the main table, swallowing the room's noise. The children at the kids' table stopped their squirming, sensing the shift in atmosphere. All eyes were on me, standing there, holding the turkey. My mind was blank, except for the path I needed to take. I didn't answer David. I couldn't. My voice wouldn't work. All the words, all the years of unspoken pain were a lump in my throat. I simply turned, the heavy platter balanced in my hands, and walked towards the kitchen archway. My steps were steady. The turkey was surprisingly cumbersome, requiring both hands to hold it securely. I could feel the heat seeping into my fingers. I walked past the kids' table, past Leo, who was staring at me, bewildered. I didn't look at him directly. I couldn't risk faltering. I walked through the kitchen, towards the back door that led to the garage. Helena's voice, sharp now, followed me. "What do you think you're doing?" David was saying something too, but it was muffled, stunned. I didn't pause. I didn't look back. The kitchen felt cavernous, silent, except for my own footsteps and the slight clink of the turkey platter. I reached the door to the garage. It was heavy. How would I open it with the turkey? I shifted the platter to one arm, balancing it precariously against my hip, and reached for the doorknob. It turned. I pulled the door open, stepped through, and it swung shut behind me with a quiet click. I was in the garage. The air was cold, smelling of concrete and gasoline. It was blessedly quiet. The noise of the house, the shock, the questions were muffled behind the door. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, the turkey still warm and heavy in my arms. My car was parked right there. I needed to get to it. My keys were in my coat. The coat was in the closet by the front door. I had gone the wrong way in my single-minded focus. Okay, I thought, regroup. I couldn't go back through the kitchen. Not now that I had made my move. I needed to get to the front hall without re-entering the main part of the house if possible. Was there another way? No, not really. Just the kitchen. I'd have to face them again, briefly. Or maybe they would be too stunned to move. I took a deep breath. The turkey felt heavier now, a lead weight of consequence. I clutched it tighter. I opened the garage door that led back into the kitchen. Silent. It seemed the house had gone completely quiet. I stepped back through the doorway, eyes scanning. No one was in the kitchen. Good. I could hear faint, tense voices from the dining room. I moved quickly now, towards the hallway. The front closet was only a few steps away. I reached it, fumbling with the handle with one hand while still cradling the turkey. The door opened. My coat was the first thing I saw. I reached into the pocket, my fingers closing around my keys. Got them. Now the final stretch. The front door was just a few feet away. As I turned from the closet, I saw them, David and Helena, standing in the dining room archway, staring at me. Their faces were pale, shocked. The other guests were visible behind them, a frozen tableau of disbelief. The turkey felt like a shield. I walked towards the front door, towards them, but not to them. I kept my eyes forward. Mother? Wait. David's voice was sharp now, no longer muffled. I didn't stop. I reached the front door. My hand found the doorknob. I pulled the door open. The cold November air hit my face. It felt clean, sharp. I could feel their eyes on my back as I stepped outside. I didn't close the door immediately. I turned slightly, enough to see them framed in the doorway. David took a step forward, a look of bewildered anger on his face. Helena stood behind him, her jaw set. I looked from David to Helena, then back to the turkey in my arms. It was still warm. It was still heavy. All the years of quiet hurt, of feeling unseen, coalesced in that moment. This was it. This was my answer. This was my declaration. I turned my back on them, walked down the steps, and towards my car parked at the curb. I could hear David calling my name, louder now, frustrated. I didn't respond. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, unlocked the passenger door. I carefully placed the turkey on the seat, buckling the seatbelt around it almost instinctively. It felt absurd, strapping in a cooked bird, but it was precious cargo, the symbol of my liberation. I closed the passenger door, walked around to the driver's side, got in and started the engine. The car hummed to life, a comforting, familiar sound. I looked up at the house. David and Helena were standing on the porch now, silhouetted against the warm light of the open doorway. The frozen guests were visible in the hall behind them. They were watching me go. I put the car in gear, pulled away from the curb, and drove off down the quiet Evanston street. The house shrunk in my rearview mirror. The turkey sat beside me, a silent, steaming companion. The drive home felt both surreal and intensely real. The streets were quiet, the usual Thanksgiving traffic having thinned out. The turkey sat beside me, warm against the cool leather of the seat, filling the car with its savory aroma. It felt like I was driving with a conspirator, a partner in crime. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tight, my knuckles white. My heart was still racing, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving behind a shaky exhaustion. What had I done? I had walked out of my son's house on Thanksgiving, taking the main dish with me. It was outrageous. It was dramatic. It was utterly necessary. The silence in the car was profound after the noise of the party, after David's calls, after the shocked silence of the house. It was the sound of my own thoughts, loud and clear for the first time in a long time, no longer filtered through the need to appease, to accommodate, to minimize, just my thoughts. And they were surprisingly calm. I wasn't racked with guilt. I wasn't consumed by regret. There was sadness, a deep ache for the family I thought I had, for the holiday tradition that had been weaponized against me. But beneath the sadness was a hard kernel of something new, relief. I had done it. I had finally said, in the most unambiguous way possible, that I would not accept their terms anymore. The turkey was more than just food. It was a symbol. It was the effort, the time, the tradition, the gathering. And they had tried to exclude me from the heart of it. So I took the heart. It felt like I had taken back a piece of myself, the part that had been shrinking, conforming, trying to fit into a space where I was clearly not wanted. I drove through familiar neighborhoods, the Thanksgiving decorations on houses blurring as I passed. Each street sign, each familiar landmark, was a small anchor in the reality I was now creating for myself, my own reality, separate from their expectations and dismissals. I thought about David's face, shocked and angry. I thought about Helena's, cold and furious. They hadn't expected it. They had expected me to comply, to shrink into the corner they had assigned me. My defiance had clearly thrown them. Good. It was time they were uncomfortable. I had been uncomfortable for years. The turkey emitted a low heat, a comforting presence next to me. It smelled like Thanksgiving should, abundant, welcoming, all the things their table had not been for me. I pulled into my own driveway. My small house, quiet and dark, sat waiting. It was just me here now. It had been just me for years, since my husband passed, but it had always felt temporary, a place I was waiting to leave to be fully incorporated into my son's growing family. Now it felt like a refuge. My space, my rules. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet darkness. The silence of my own home wrapped around me, different from the tense silence I had left behind. This silence was peaceful. It was mine. I looked at the turkey. It still seemed significant, almost majestic, even strapped into the passenger seat. It was proof of what had happened, and proof of what I had done. I opened the car door, the interior light coming on, illuminating the golden bird. It was time to bring the symbol of my independence in. It was time to figure out what came next. I carefully unbuckled the turkey and lifted the heavy platter. It was still warm. I carried it up the steps to my front door, fumbling with my keys, the weight pulling at my arms. Stepping inside my house felt like stepping into a different world. The air was still, quiet, smelling faintly of the cinnamon candle I'd lit that morning. It was the antithesis of the crowded, tense energy of David's house. I carried the turkey through my small living room, into the kitchen. My kitchen was clean, orderly, but felt empty. I set the turkey down on the counter, its weight making a solid thud. It looked enormous in my small space. It still radiated heat, a silent reproach, or a triumphant companion. I wasn't sure which. I just looked at it for a long moment. The centerpiece of a feast I had refused to be sidelined at, the symbol of a family connection I had severed. At least for now. My hands were greasy from holding the platter. I walked to the sink and washed them slowly, feeling the warm water against my skin. I looked out the window over the sink. It was dark now. The holiday was over for me. The silence in the house was profound. No distant laughter, no clinking plates, no polite, strained conversation. Just silence. And the ticking of the kitchen clock. What now? I was standing in my kitchen with a full Thanksgiving turkey. I wasn't hungry. The adrenaline had killed my appetite. The emotional turmoil had left me feeling hollowed out, yet strangely full of a quiet energy. I opened the refrigerator. Leftovers from my normal solitary week stared back at me. A carton of yogurt, some wilted lettuce, a single serving of something I couldn't identify. The contrast with the abundance I had just left and taken was stark. I didn't want to eat the turkey. Not right now. It felt too loaded, too significant. It was an artifact of the battle I had just fought. I needed something simple, something grounding. I made myself a cup of tea. The ritual felt calming. Boiling the water, selecting the tea bag, pouring the hot liquid into my favorite mug. Small, familiar actions in a world that had just been profoundly shaken. I sat at my kitchen table, the mug warming my hands, and looked at the turkey on the counter. It dominated the space. It wasn't just dinner anymore. It was a statement, a monument to a breaking point. I thought about the quiet indignities that had accumulated over the years, the way my suggestions were politely ignored, the way family plans were made without consulting me, the way my home felt less and less like a welcome gathering place and more like a convenient drop-off point for errands or temporary childcare. The kids' table was the physical manifestation of all of it. The place you put things you don't want cluttering the main view. Out of the way. Easily managed. The tea was hot, slightly bitter. It brought me back to myself, to my own body, sitting in my own chair, in my own house. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. Not in that moment. There was a sense of peace that settled over me. Quiet but deep. The peace of having acted, of having refused to accept the unacceptable. The consequences would come. The phone calls, the angry texts, the awkward conversations, the potential damage to my relationship with my son and his family. All of that was still ahead. But in this moment, there was just the quiet house, the warm turkey on the counter, and the simple fact that I had chosen my own dignity over their version of family unity. The silence in the house was broken eventually by the chime of my phone. I knew who it would be. I looked at the screen. David, calling. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. What could he possibly say? Why did you take the turkey, mother? As if the turkey was the point. As if the years of feeling erased, of being marginalized, of the final public humiliation of the kids' table meant nothing compared to the missing centerpiece. The phone stopped ringing. Moments later, a text came through. Call me, mother. What was that? Still no understanding. Just confusion and inconvenience. I put my phone face down on the table. I needed space. I needed time to process what had happened, not to immediately engage in a defensive, likely sicklier conversation. I looked at the turkey again. It seemed less imposing now, just a large, cooked bird. But its significance remained. It was my trophy, my burden, What should I do with it? I could carve it myself, eat a solitary Thanksgiving meal. That felt too sad. Too much like proving I didn't need them, when the point wasn't about needing them for food, but needing them for connection that they had withheld. I could give it away. To a neighbor, a friend. That felt better. Sharing the bounty, reclaiming the spirit of Thanksgiving in a way they had failed to. But not tonight. Tonight, it would just sit there, a silent witness. I walked around my kitchen, touching familiar objects. The worn wooden cutting board my husband had made, the set of ceramic bowls I'd collected over the years. These were things that held memories, real memories, of a life lived, of a family that had been, before it fragmented into this new, painful shape. My actions tonight felt like an attempt to gather those fragments, to hold on to the pieces of myself that were still whole. I opened my laptop. I hadn't checked emails in days, deliberately disconnecting from the outside world for the holiday. Now, the outside world felt like a welcome refuge. I scrolled through the mundane subject lines: sales, newsletters, spam. Then I saw an email from an old friend, Sarah, who lived across town. We hadn't talked in a while. Just a short note, asking how I was, if I was having a good holiday. A simple act of reaching out, a reminder that connections existed outside the strained boundaries of my immediate family. It felt like a lifeline. I considered writing back immediately, pouring out the events of the evening. But Sarah wasn't family. She wouldn't have the same complicated history. She could offer perspective, perhaps, but she couldn't fix the core wound. The wound that my son, my own flesh and blood, seemed unwilling or unable to acknowledge. The decision to leave felt less impulsive now, in the quiet aftermath. It felt like a necessary act of self-preservation, like finally taking a stand after years of being pushed back. They had made their position clear. They had assigned me a role, a diminished one, and expected me to play it. By taking the turkey and leaving, I had refused the role. I had refused the script they had written for me. The turkey remained on the counter, its presence a constant reminder of the evening's events. It was a physical weight, but also an emotional one. What did I do with a symbol of broken family? How did I turn it into something else? The house was silent again. My thoughts drifted back to the moment I lifted the turkey, the physical effort, the sudden silence of the room, the look on David's face. It was etched into my memory. It was the moment I stopped being passive, the moment I took control, however small, of my own narrative. The night was long. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dining room, the two tables, the turkey, and David and Helena's faces in the doorway. The silence in my house felt vast, sometimes peaceful, sometimes lonely. I got up before dawn. The kitchen was cold. The turkey was still on the counter, a dark shape in the pre-dawn light. It looked less like a symbol now, more like just a large piece of meat, but it still carried the weight of the previous evening. I knew I couldn't leave it there indefinitely. I needed to deal with it, to finish the act I had started. I decided I would carve it. Not for a feast, not for anyone else, but for myself. A quiet, private act of processing. I got out a large cutting board and a sharp knife. The knife felt good in my hand, solid and capable. I started to carve the turkey, piece by piece. The meat was tender, still slightly warm in places. The act was simple, repetitive. It allowed my mind to wander, to revisit the past without being overwhelmed by emotion. I thought about all the times I had carved turkeys for my family, holidays, birthdays, Sunday dinners, the care I had taken, the effort to make sure everyone got the piece they wanted, the joy I had felt in feeding the people I loved. This was different. This was carving for one. But it wasn't sad. It felt deliberate, empowering even. Each slice of meat was a small victory, a piece of the whole that I was now controlling. I packed the meat into containers, stacking them neatly in the refrigerator. It was a practical task, turning the dramatic centerpiece into manageable portions. As I worked, I thought about the future. What would happen now? Would David call again? Would he apologize? Would he demand an explanation? I didn't know, and for the first time, I felt like I could face whatever came. I had drawn a line. I had stated my worth, not with words, but with action. And now I had the turkey, carved and stored, proof of my stand. Later that morning, Sarah texted back, just finished carving our turkey. How was yours? Everything okay? A simple, innocent question. I hesitated for a moment, then typed back, mine was eventful. Needed a change of scenery. Ended up bringing it home. Yours sounds lovely. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. A hint of the drama without unleashing the full story. Sarah responded quickly, oh, sounds intriguing. Want to grab coffee next week? My treat. Always love your stories. Her simple offer of connection, of valuing my company and my experiences, felt like a balm. It was a reminder that my worth wasn't solely defined by my role in my son's family, that I had a life, friends, stories worth telling outside of their dining room. The turkey was tucked away in the fridge now. The counter was clean. The kitchen looked normal again, but I felt different, lighter in a strange way. The heavy weight of years of unspoken hurt had been acknowledged, brought into the light through a bizarre, defiant act. The act of taking the turkey wasn't just about the food or the insult. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about saying, you don't get to decide my place. I decide my place. And my place wasn't at a separate table, relegated to the sidelines. My place was where I chose be, treated with dignity and respect. Days turned into a week. No calls from David or Helena. Just silence. A heavy, pointed silence that felt colder than any argument. It was their way of punishing me, I knew, of waiting for me to break, to apologize, to explain. But I would not this time. I was in my own space, living my own life, with the turkey meat in my refrigerator a constant, quiet reminder of my decision. I ate some of the turkey, made sandwiches, a simple soup. It was just food now. The intense symbolism had faded, replaced by the mundane reality of leftovers. But the act of eating it in my own kitchen on my own terms still felt significant. It was sustenance I had taken for myself, not been given. It was a quiet reclaiming of nourishment, both physical and emotional. I met Sarah for coffee. I told her, hesitantly at first, about Thanksgiving, about the kids' table, about taking the turkey. She listened, her expression shifting from disbelief to understanding. She didn't laugh. She didn't judge. She just listened. And then she said, good for you. It was time. Her simple validation meant more than she could know. It wasn't just me. Someone else saw it, understood the years of buildup that led to that moment. She talked about her own experiences, different circumstances, but the same theme of feeling invisible, of being sidelined as she got older, and her children built their own lives. We talked for a long time, two older women acknowledging the quiet struggles often hidden behind polite family facades. It felt good to be seen, truly seen, by a peer. Not as mom or grandma or the one who caused a scene, but as a woman with her own feelings, her own breaking point, her own right to dignity. Her perspective helped solidify my own resolve. This wasn't just an overreaction to a chair, it was the culmination of years of being erased. And my response, however unconventional, was valid. I went home feeling stronger. The silence from David was still there, a vast emptiness where our connection used to be. It hurt. It was supposed to hurt. But the hurt felt cleaner now, less mixed with confusion and self-doubt. I knew where I stood. They had shown me, and I had shown them that I wouldn't stand there anymore. I spent time organizing things in my house, sorting through old boxes, creating a sense of order in my physical space that mirrored the clarity I was finding emotionally. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was building something new, a life that was entirely mine on my terms. I reached out to a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, another relative who had quietly drifted away from the main family gatherings, sensing a similar shift in dynamics. Her response was warm, welcoming. Another small connection, a thread reaching out into the world. The turkey leftovers were almost gone. Their physical presence in my fridge was diminishing, but the lesson remained. I had I had taken something back, and I was okay. More than okay. I was finding a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. The silence from David stretched into weeks. The holidays passed quietly in my small house. No invitations, no calls, no perfunctory texts. It was painful. This severing, even though I had initiated the final break. It felt like a limb had been amputated, necessary for survival, but leaving a phantom ache. The turkey was long gone, eaten or discarded, its physical presence replaced by the stark reality of the chasm that had opened. I focused on my own life. I joined a book club at the local library in Evanston. I started volunteering at a community garden. Small steps reaching outwards, building connections that were not based on obligation or a shared, painful history. These interactions were simple, direct. People saw me, talked to me, valued my contributions, however small. There was no subtext, no history of slights to navigate. It was refreshing. It was healing. The silence from David was a constant, but it was no longer the only sound in my life. I filled my days with my own activities, my own rhythm. I wasn't waiting for his call anymore. I was living. One afternoon, weeks after Thanksgiving, my phone chimed with a notification. Not a call, not a text, but a photo message. It was from David. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. My hands were shaking slightly. What was it? A picture of the empty dining room table? A picture of the kids' table, perhaps with a note? I tapped the screen. The photo loaded. It was a picture of my youngest grandchild, Leo, standing in the snow in their backyard, bundled up in a bright blue coat, smiling directly at the camera. There was no message attached, just the photo. My breath hitched. Leo. My heart ached with love for him, a pure, uncomplicated love, untouched by the messiness of the adult world. He looked happy, innocent. The photo was a lifeline. It was also a test. Was it a peace offering? A way to connect without confronting the difficult reality? Was it David trying to reach out, unsure how? Or was it Helena using Leo as a proxy? I didn't know. But seeing his face, his bright, innocent smile, reminded me of why I had fought so hard for my place in this family, and why leaving had been so painful. It wasn't just about me. It was about my connection to them, to the future generations. I looked at the photo for a long time. I wanted to respond, to ask about him, to tell David that I missed him. But the unresolved pain of Thanksgiving, the silence that had followed, held me back. A simple, cute photo, thank you, felt inadequate. A long, emotional explanation felt like too much. I did nothing. I just saved the photo to my phone. His face was now in my gallery, a silent link. The next day, another photo. This time, of the two older grandchildren building a snowman. Again, no message. Just the picture. It continued like that. Every few days, photos of the children. At the park, doing homework, eating breakfast, small, mundane moments captured and sent to me. It was a thin thread, but it was something. It was David's way, I suspected, of trying to maintain contact without addressing the elephant in the room, the kids' table, the turkey, the silence. It was still avoiding the core issue, the acknowledgement of the hurt, the apology for the dismissal. But it was a gesture, a hesitant step across the chasm. I still didn't respond to the photos with words, but I looked at them. I saved them. I allowed myself to see my grandchildren, to feel connected to their lives through these silent images. It wasn't the resolution I had once craved, a full reconciliation, a return to a harmonious family unit. That family unit, I now knew, had been largely an illusion built on my own self-denial. The quiet resolution was this: I had my dignity. I had my own space, my own life. And the connection with my son, with my grandchildren, would exist on new terms. Terms that I had helped to define, however, painfully. The photos continued to arrive, small, quiet messages in the vast silence, and I continued to look at them, holding on to the fragile hope they represented, while standing firm in the space I had finally decisively claimed for myself. The turkey was gone, but the lesson remained, carved just as clearly as the bird had been. I was worthy of a seat at the main table. Or I would build my own, and building my own, it turned out, was the strongest choice of all.